How many of you were raised by parents? Okay, all right. Apparently we'll be talking to you after service. No. Don't hurt your hand, Mom. Don't hurt your hand. All right. So all of you were raised by parents, and in raising you, your parents shared specific things with you, right? Right? Obviously, you learned how to function somewhat in society based on what your parents have done for you. I'm just going to move this down so I can see over here. How do I do this? I'm trying to flip the switch. I'm too weak. Oh, it's my old age. There we go. Hey! Hi, everybody. Okay. What? It's not a reflection on you, Mom. Don't worry. All right. So, we were taught how to do things in a particular way. We all have quirks. We all have, I don't know, things that are pretty unique to us and our families. We do things maybe not the way that everybody else does things, right? That's the beauty of growing up, as individuals. We have an opportunity to learn things in different ways, to learn different ways to cope with things. When trouble comes our way, we all have different ways that we know how to deal with those situations. Sometimes those are not the healthiest of ways, right? You have people that recede into themselves whenever danger comes near, like a little armadillo rolling up into a ball. Not necessarily the most helpful. You're most likely to get kicked around. You have people that when they feel danger coming, they go into attack mode and they just beat down whatever danger is coming their way. That could be good, could be bad. You have some people that show absolutely no defensive measures and they just stand there and they take it. Because eventually it'll stop. You have all sorts of different ways to handle different things that come your way. And that comes from how you were brought up, how you were raised. It basically was your education in life. Whether your parents were the best role models or they gave you the best values, they gave you something. Even if it was a negative response to how they were operating, right? For example, if you have, let's say, best case scenario. Say, for example, you have my children. See what I did there? Anyways, so say, for example, you have my children. I say my children because one thing is been constant with my children. My children have grown up in a Christian household. Not all of us had that. Not all of us had that. My children grew up in a Christian household. Did you know that 72% of children that go to college renounce Christianity? That's a high number. So I could have done everything right, brought them up in a Christian household, forced them to go to church every Sunday, and there's a 72% chance when they go away to college, if that's the path that they choose, that they would turn away from that. Now, why is that? Well, most likely it would be because I did not prepare them properly. I may have given them all the tools, but not shown them how to use it. And that's kind of hard to hear sometimes, right? When someone tells you that something you've been doing your whole life, or for the vast majority, isn't quite right. That you could have done it better. Personally, that was always been one of my big things, I mean, for work, for example, I'm in quality assurance. I'm the one that's supposed to know to check other people to make sure that they know right. And it's difficult for me to sit there when I've decided on something wrong. And it's one of the things that I work on continuously. Because I have, for all intents and purposes, I have everything laid out for me. I know exactly where to research, where to get all the information that I need. And if it doesn't exactly spell things out correctly or all the way, I'm the one that's supposed to bring all of it together and make a logical conclusion that makes sense. That's my job. That's what I get paid for. Sometimes I do that wrong. Now, at this point, you're probably saying, that's great, James, but when are we going to start talking about Romans? Believe it or not, that was all about what we're talking about today. That was the crux of what we're talking about. So I want you to kind of think in that vein, the things that you've been taught as you grew up, how you coped with different situations, the things that were passed on to you, the treasures that you were given, that you were entrusted with, and how you deal with those things, how you pass those on. At this point in time, Paul likes to do this thing in his writing. I don't know, I kind of equate it with a comedian doing a stand-up routine. Because just about any comedian that you watch, good or bad, at some point in time, someone's going to start heckling from the audience, right? You suck! Get off the stage! That was mild. But Paul, in writing his letters, anticipates questions that may come up, heckles, if you will. And as we start chapter 3, we're getting into that type of a situation where Paul has anticipated questions will come to pass. People will heckle and throw insults at him, and he immediately starts to answer that. And the question is, why would he think that he would need to do this? Well, if you remember last week, Colin talked a little bit about this, and we're going to continue. We're going to start by reading from chapter 1, verse 25, and we're going to read through verse 8 of chapter 3. So, the Jewish ceremony of circumcision has value only if you obey God's law, but you don't obey God's law, you are no better off than an uncircumcised Gentile. And if the Gentiles obey God's law, won't God declare them to be his own people? In fact, uncircumcised Gentiles who keep God's law will condemn you Jews who are circumcised and possess God's law but don't obey it. For you are not a true Jew just because you were born of the Jewish parent or because you have gone through the ceremony of circumcision. No, a true Jew is one whose heart is right with God. And true circumcision is not merely obeying the letter of the law. Rather, it is a change of heart produced by God's Spirit. And a person with a changed heart seeks praise from God, not from people. Then what's the advantage of being a Jew? Is there any value in the ceremony of circumcision? Yes, there are great benefits. First of all, the Jews were entrusted with the whole revelation of God. True, some of them were unfaithful, but because they were unfaithful, does that mean that God would be unfaithful? Of course not. Not even if everyone else is a liar, God is true. As the scriptures say about him, you will be proved right in what you say, and you will win your case in court. But some people might say, our sinfulness serves a good purpose, for it helps people to see how righteous God is. Isn't it unfair for him to then punish us? This is merely a human point of view. Of course not. If God were not entirely fair, how would he be qualified to judge the world? But, some might argue, how can God condemn me as a sinner if my dishonesty highlights his truthfulness and brings him more glory? And some people may even slander us by claiming that we say, the more we sin, the better it is. Those who say such things deserve condemnation. So, is there a benefit in being a Jew? Is there a benefit in circumcision? I'm not going to talk so much about the benefits of circumcision today. There are some benefits, but, it's kind of up in the air. However, I can tell you that there is a benefit in being a Jew. The benefit of being the Jew is they were entrusted with the oracle of God. They were entrusted with the Word of God. The entire revelation of God was laid out for them. That is presented to us this day and age as the Scriptures. And remember, as we discussed, Scriptures, not talking about the New Testament, we're talking about the Old Testament. Right? The Jews were entrusted with what we call the Old Testament, which is the whole revelation of God. Think about that. Everything that you need to know about the person of God and his plans for humanity is contained in the Old Testament. So what is the New Testament then? Does anybody have a gander, a guess? What? The New Testament shows the fulfillment of those promises. So the Old Testament is what they were entrusted with. And they had opportunity then to take what they have learned, what they've been entrusted with, to give that to people, right? They were directed, in fact, to give it to their children. How were they directed to give it to their children? This should be pretty simple if anybody's read any part of the Old Testament. How were they directed? They were given ceremonies that they were supposed to keep holy. They were given feasts. They were supposed to pass on through oral tradition to their children. They were supposed to speak about it in their homes. They were supposed to speak about it as they went out. Now, if you're familiar at all with Jewish history, this system broke down quite often. We see the consequences of that system breaking down quite often. Because though they were entrusted with it, and though they were instructed how to use it, sometimes it just didn't quite work out for them. Because though they were passing it on, though they were given the law that showed God's grace, that showed his love, though they were given all of these tasks that they could perform to help pass on this knowledge to their children and beyond, something was lost in translation for them. Somehow, between one generation and the next, something was missing. Something wasn't conveyed properly. So is there advantage to being a Jew? Absolutely an advantage to being a Jew. Because the Jews were given the whole revelation of God. They were given the character of God laid out for them. And they were entrusted with that. Now, what they did with that is something a little different. Just like a parent who teaches their child, this is how you deal with life. These are the things that you do to navigate the world. If this situation comes up, you do this. Sometimes that gets lost in translation. The way that it usually gets lost in translation is it becomes all about the mechanics of it. The heart of it is lost. It's definitely the case that we see with the Jews. It became all about following the law. The leaders would spend hours poring over the law that God had given to them and saying, well, let's see here. Well, obviously, if we're supposed to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, we can't do any work on the Sabbath. And you know, I've noticed that when you spit on the ground, it kind of plows it a little bit. Now, if I bet you if I spit too much, I could actually plow enough to plant something right there. So that obviously is work, so I cannot spit on the Sabbath because it'll plow the ground. And thus I would not be honoring and keep it holy. You know what else is kind of work? I don't know about you, but I get tired when I walk too far. So that must mean in order to keep the Sabbath holy, I can only take, I don't know, what's a good number? 5 steps, 7 steps? And then I probably would need to sit down because too many steps, it would look too much like I was working. It would be work for my body, and I would not be honoring the Sabbath and keep it holy. And you know what else is work? Having to make dinner. In order to make sure that I don't have to work for dinner, I'll cook everything ahead of time. And it may be work if I have to take it out of something, so I'll just take it and leave it out, and then we can make sure that we eat it that day, so it'll be fine. Every little detail, every little nuance had to be thought about and distilled. Now, that's mechanics. So what was passed on to the next generation was the mechanics of how to do something. It was literally, this is how you build a house. You use hammer, wood, and nails. Put up the board, hammer the nail, move on. But that doesn't create a house. That creates a board with a nail in it. The heart of it is missing. Even if you manage to get up all the walls of the house and get it built, it's still just a shell. Congratulations, you have the mechanics down. It needs to be filled with the heart for it to become a home. Something got lost in translation. It's what I like to call rich kid syndrome. They had the whole entirety of God's Word, His personality, His plans for the future, laid out for them. And in order to make sure that their kids understood it, they just gave it to them without a proper understanding of what it actually was. It's the same as a child growing up in a family that they worked hard to get where they were. They were born on the wrong side of the tracks, without a penny to their name. But they conquered. They came to America. They made their own way. They pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. There's tons of little phrases that I could keep throwing in there. But you get the understanding, right? They get a small loan of $1 million from their father. And in order to make sure that their kids don't have to go through what they did, in order to make sure that their kids have a better life, it's just given to them. New clothes, anytime you want them. You need money? Sure, here you go. New cars. How many of you guys got cars when you were 16? I did too. Here's the thing. Mine didn't have an engine or a transmission. Word. Brand new cars whenever you need them. What did y'all get graduation gifts when you graduated from high school? I got a mug. It said, "Barely made it." I still have it. It's a graduation bear mug. My uncle got it for me. Everything just handed to them. Now, what's the problem when you just hand somebody everything that they need? They break it, there's no appreciation for it, it has no value for them. It didn't take any effort for me to get it. So all of God's glory, the whole revelation of God, who He was, His personality, the plans for His chosen people, just given to the next generation. And what happens? They don't understand the value of it, and it starts to fall by the wayside. It loses part of it because the heart of it isn't passed on. So though we're entrusted, it didn't all get passed on. There's something for us to learn from that. As we have a generation right now in Aletheia, we have overcome many things. We have the opportunity to not just pass on knowledge and the mechanics of things, we have the opportunity to pass on the relationship of things, to give it some meaning. The reason that 72% of children that come from Christian homes turn away from God in college is because they're not taught the meaning of the words. To them, Christianity is something you do on Sunday. Or they may be heavily involved in their church, and they may be there several times a week. And they may have, man, I am up on my Bible. I can recite the entire first chapter of James just like that. But they don't understand what their faith is based off of. Faith is just faith. We cannot be a people that teach God is love and say nothing else. We cannot be a people that don't live our lives every day like we have a belief in who God is and what has been done for us. That we have a relationship with God. Because if we do, we risk passing on a terrible legacy. A legacy built on mechanics, a face value that doesn't have any heart. And that's what you see over and over again in Jewish history. The mechanics being passed on, but their value being lost. True, some of them were unfaithful, but just because they're unfaithful, does that mean that God will be unfaithful? Absolutely not. God was faithful in passing on to them, and regardless of how many times they faltered, God still worked his plan through to completion. So even though we will do our best to make sure that our kids are educated into who God is and the relationship that he wishes to have, if they're unfaithful, God's plan will still work through. Even if we as parents fail to pass that on. The lack of proper teaching leads to a lot of bumping around. Think of ivy. As it grows, ivy just searches everywhere. In fact, if you want to see something fascinating, you can go to the back corner of our building. I'll unlock the gate. And you will see that ivy has started to reach into the stucco siding and just go everywhere. Because it's not given any guidance. There's no trellis. That's the way America teaches us we need to raise our kids. Just let them be them. I don't want to put my standards on them. I don't want to stifle their growth. Let them be free and experience who they're meant to be, our spirit child. We live in a world now that has dealt with the consequences of that. The consequences of that thinking are people growing up thinking that, you know, what you've got going on doesn't really matter to me as long as I get to do what I want to do. We have a nation of children that are in their 30s and 40s and 50s. It's time to wean them off. They need to understand you have to have some boundaries. You have to have some guidance. For ivy, it's a trellis. For us, it's our parents. Or at least it was supposed to be. But God still has a way in that. God still has a way to train you up, even if you're a dodgy old codger. God has a way if your parents can't handle it. If they can't do things appropriately. God puts people in your life that will handle it appropriately. We have examples of that right here in this group. I didn't have a father there on a regular basis. But God put people in my life to hold that position. When people say, oh, well, you think of God as your father. Okay, so he's absent and I only get to see him on the summer. Oh, and he takes me to Disneyland. Right? But God puts people in place so that you can understand what that really means. God puts people in place to guide you and to give you those boundaries that you need. And it can come at any age. It doesn't have to happen when you're a child. That's the beauty of it. God's truth doesn't change just because you get older. Paul goes on to quote Psalm 51. You will be proved right in what you say, and you will win your case in court. Because God, he takes care of things, right? He makes sure that his plan comes to fruition, and he makes sure that people can be in relationship with him. In fact, I would say he's done more to make sure that people can be in relationship than any of us have ever done. What was happening in Psalm 51 right there? Does anybody remember what Psalm 51 is? David's praying for forgiveness. And he's praying for forgiveness because, I don't know, I would say he did some pretty bad things, right? This is how I know that reconciliation with God is possible. Because I have never stolen another man's wife and then had him killed. Pretty positive that's never going to happen. So since I've never had anybody killed, and I've never stolen another man's wife, I'm pretty sure that my relationship with God can be restored and grow. Because God did that for David. Psalm 51 is immediately after Nathan brought to him the fact, you stole this person. And you had her husband killed. God will be proven right and just. And he wishes to have a relationship with us. Now, we know that God wants to have a relationship with us. We know that we, as Christians, have been entrusted with the New Testament, the fulfillment of who God is and God's plan. But there's different perspectives on things, right? There's different motivations. The world teaches you, and I know this because I live in the world, so I speak from experience here. You need to look out for yourself, right? In order to make sure you get what is necessary for you to be successful, you need to take care of yourself to get what's coming to you. So, with that in mind, there's different perspectives that are out there. There are different ways that you could approach things. Even a bad person could do good things. In fact, what do you most often hear on the news after like a mass shooting? Oh, he's such a good kid. What do you hear on the news after, a neighbor, does the whole unfortunate, murder-suicide thing? Oh, they just seemed like the nicest family in the world. Never a hint of any issues. Or when, the relative molests their nephew or niece or whatever. Oh, I had no idea. It was a nice guy. Very neighborly, very friendly. Good people can do good things. Good people can do good things. But it's not about the fact that they do good things, it's what their motivations are. Because, as pointed out here, your motivation could be completely wrong. The reason that I sin is so that God's glory can be shown. Right? Well, it makes sense. The more I sin, the more people have the opportunity to see God forgive me, and his glory is revealed to all. But there are people who think this. Rose is adamant that this should not be the case. And I agree, 100%. But people come from different perspectives. In fact, this is a conversation that I literally had with somebody not 4 years ago. The only reason that people are Christians is because they want to be looked upon as respectable. So Christianity is for respect. The only reason that people are Christians is so they can have fire insurance. The only reason that people say they are Christians is because of what they can get by being a Christian, right? Bring all the tithes into the storehouse. I will reap upon you benefits such that are overflowing. Right? It's because of what you can get. So there are those people who would live by that motivation. I will be a Christian because it gets me things. And the problem with that is, when push comes to shove, if Christianity no longer fits what they want and it no longer provides what they need, they're out the door. They're gone. When church no longer makes them happy, I'm not happy. That pastor was rude to me, and he told me I was a sinner, and he told me I needed to stop living this way. Told me that I couldn't drink to excess anymore and go out and party on Friday nights with all my friends. God, the nerve. The nerve. And I say happy because happiness is a lie. And the world seeks happiness. They seek out the lie. So we know that their motivations cannot be true because they seek after which is unattainable. I know it kind of sounds a little bit extreme to say that happiness is the lie that people seek after, but their actions point that out every day. Everybody has different motivations. I don't come to church because of what it will get me. I don't preach at this church because I wish to be wealthy. I don't preach because I like to hear my voice. And it's not even because I speak really well. I can't even get through the announcements. But I preach because God has entrusted me. He's entrusted me with the reality of who He is and the fulfillment of His promises. And I have to share that. I cannot hold that in. And I have to make sure that it's given to you in its entirety, not in part, not just the mechanics. The passage today is the why. So I want you to think about this as we go to cell groups. We have been entrusted with the gospel, each and every one of us. Even though we may be unfaithful, God never fails. But without proper passing on of this understanding, people are going to be unguided. Without proper education, we fail. So, do you act like you are entrusted with the gospel? When trials come your way, do you blame God for punishing you? Why are you a Christian? What is your motivation? Those are just seeds. I expect great cell group conversations. So please go ahead and go to your cell groups, and then we'll meet back here and we will think about what God has done for us.